Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Attention in Georgia continues to focus on the political stalemate between the Georgian Dream-dominated government and its opponents. About 80% of Georgians indicate that they support accession to the European Union, a fact that the ruling party is well aware of. However, it has not stopped the party or party leaders from deepening connections with Russia. Which path will Georgians ultimately choose? Well, we're joined now by Grigol Yulukhidze. He's an associate professor, Caucasus University, for his analysis of the situation in Georgia. Welcome back.
Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, good to have you back. So give us an overview, please, if you would. Let's start with the political situation at the moment. How would you describe it after all the protests that have been going on, after the shift away from the EU in November last year by the Georgian Dream Party? What's the state of play now?
We see the deepening political crisis on a daily basis. The main reason, of course, of this political crisis is the actions of the Georgian government, which, as you have mentioned, shifted from its foreign policy. And right now we see, at the same time, enlargement and maximization of bilateral relations with Moscow, which automatically means for this Eastern European country the isolation from the West. And a lot of Georgians understand this risk quite well, because in case of the failure of Georgia to reach its main foreign policy orientations, I mean, European and Euro-Atlantic integration, this, I would say, loophole will be very actively and very effectively used by the Kremlin. They understand the risks quite well. They know Georgian reality quite, let's say, profoundly. And this momentum is very well executed by the Russian intelligence services, because their presence.
So let me just understand correctly. What you're suggesting is that the Russian intelligence service, the FSB, for example, is actually running or engineering the situation that has been publicized by the Georgian Dream.
I would say assisting.
Assisting.
And it is very difficult to say what kind of involvement we see. But the modus operandi of the Georgian Dream is very similar to the modus operandi of the pro-Russian regimes in Central Asia, in Serbia, in Belarus. And the latest events once again showed it, that the Georgian Dream is somehow following this line. And that's why this deepening political crisis becomes even more dangerous for the future of this country, because we see the crackdown in the relations with Brussels, with strategic partners like Washington. And this geopolitical isolation gives a huge advantage to Russia, which on its side is in a very complicated geopolitical situation because of this ongoing full-scale war in Ukraine. But in Georgia, Moscow is gaining its momentum.
Understood. So what should the stance of the European Union be in this situation? Because thus far what they've done is saying, well, we can't talk to Georgia about accession, looking at the way things are at the moment. So we're kind of hands off. Do you think that was the right approach?
I would say that right now the European Union is in the regime of reaction. It means that their actions and their response will be delayed. It is much better to act prior to the deterioration of the situation, but unfortunately the European Union was late, as always. And this situation is very, very similar to the situations that we saw a couple of years ago in Ukraine. Yes, the current demonstrations might seem to be very similar to the scenario of Rose Revolution back in 2003. But the reason why the people right now are demonstrating across the country is, of course, the decision of the Georgian government to change its foreign policy orientation by facts, not by words. And right now, the European Union is very, very limited in terms of actions. The only thing that Brussels can do is impose sanctions, and these general sanctions are not possible because such decisions are taken by the principle of consensus, and we see that there are two countries like Hungary and Slovakia that are against of these sanctions, and that's why the option that the European Union member states might have is imposing sanctions on the national level. But of course, such sanctions are related to certain risks because it might hit the Georgian population, society, which is extremely pro-Western, and at the same time, it might hit the Georgian economy, which might collapse quite easily because we don't speak about the strong economy. We speak about vulnerable economy, and we speak out about the country from where thousands of Georgians flee because of the poor economic situation.
Understood. So very delicate situation, the way you lay it out there. It sounds to me as though the only checks and balances lie in the hands of the Georgian people and the protests. The opposition hasn't been particularly high profile in those protests. It's been people, Georgian people, the average man and woman in the street. How effective have those protests been, and what outcome do you expect to see?
As for the outcome, I don't expect any tangible results from these demonstrations because these are demonstrations without political coordination. This is the emotional response of Georgians to the actions of the Georgian government, but we don't see any political forces that are able to take responsibility and use this energy in order to achieve some political changes.
Is it time now for the opposition to step in and take charge of these protests?
They actually did a couple of times in the past when there were mass demonstrations in Georgia, but due to their damaged reputation, I would say extremely damaged reputation, the people went back home when they arrived and when they came up and show up on the I would say stage. And that's why they are in a very complicated situation. They understand that the opposition parties are very unpopular in Georgia, but at the same time, the demonstrators are the, I would say, hostages of their current political reality in which they don't want to support any political party, but need at least leaders in order to indicate them what to do.
Could the former President Zurabishvili step into that role?
She's actually trying to benefit from this momentum, but looking at her political past and her previous statements, I would say that she is not able to achieve these political changes because she does not bring any political power. Yes, she has very good contacts. She's the only political leader who's able to call to German Chancellor, the French President, Polish President, but it does not mean that she is as powerful in Georgia as abroad. And once again, her invitation to the inauguration of Donald Trump illustrated how she's treated and perceived by the Western leaders and considered as the only legitimate leader. But as for her actions and as for her decisions to act in the Georgian politics, they are quite blurry, and we don't see any clear messages from her.
Understood.
And it does not work in her favor.
Understood. Well, you mentioned the invitation to the inauguration, Trump's inauguration. Does that send a message, in your opinion?
Sure. It shows that the new administration is not going to cooperate under these circumstances with the current Georgian government. They do not perceive Mr. Kavelashvili as the legitimate president. But the Georgian Dream understand this reality quite well, and most likely they are ready for this. And the only thing the Georgian Dream is afraid of is economic sanctions that might damage the Georgian business and the vast majority of the population. Only in this scenario becomes the situation unpredictable, and it might lead to some unpredictable developments in this political crisis.
It might also be a further opportunity for the Kremlin to step in
Exactly.
and offer some support. Tell me, how would you assess the legal situation in Georgia at the moment? The new president has actually freed, 613 people?
Yes.
We don't know quite yet why, what crimes they'd committed, or the reasons behind this release. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, I don't know the matter quite well, but I would like to say one thing that I wanted to say before. Even if the opposition manages to achieve its political goals, it's going to be very difficult to release from the Russian influence. Even if the Georgian government will be formed by extremely pro-Western forces, the Russian influences do not disappear. And also, I'd like to mention about China, which is acting very actively, investing in Georgia and increasing its political power. And this is the country which is ignored, and by lots of Western observers, the current political crisis is portrayed and shown as the fight between Russia and the West. Partially it is true, but it is the best momentum for China to gain its influence. And they are studying, learning, and acting quite effectively. And that's why I would say that it's going to be quite interesting period for Georgia in the coming months.
Well, it certainly sounds as though it's going to be a battleground, I suppose, of ideologies and political structures. You mentioned China, Russia, and of course Georgian Dream and the West, Trump. However, how much of an influence do you think the Chinese will gain? I mean, because although ostensibly the Chinese and the Russians are working together or the Chinese are supporting the Russians in their full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they do have conflicts as well underneath the surface. Does China want Russia in Georgia?
Of course not. Of course not. And the Kremlin can do nothing with this reality, because I would say that amid this ongoing war in Ukraine, Russia is somehow subordinated to China. And the Chinese understand that quite well. And they do not ask for permissions to Russians in order to act in Georgia. And I remind you that the two largest infrastructure projects are run by Chinese. This is Anaklia port, a strategic harbor in the western part of Georgia, and the main highway of the country that connects the eastern part to the west.
Right.
And there are many other economic operations.
Yeah, well, this does seem to be very par for the course for Chinese expansion globally. Thank you very much, Grigol, for coming along and sharing your analysis with us again. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.
My pleasure.
And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.